Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Boxes of Comics. I'm your host, Chase Higgins, and today we are talking about why Zack Snyder can never dream of being James Gunn. So, with everything going on into a full reboot at Warner Brothers with DC Comics, and now officially titled DC Studios, I thought it would be a good idea to compare and contrast the different creative ways of how Zack Snyder and James Gunn take an approach to handling superhero movies using the knowledge and information of having seen previous movies that were created by the two different directors. If this is something that interests you and you'd like to know more, stay tuned right after this introduction. Okay, so first thing on our agenda is to talk about Zack Snyder. So, outside of superheroes in DC, Zack is known for his directing on films such as Dawn of the Dead, Army of the Dead, Sucker Punch, and Legend of the Guardians. Based off of these names of movies, you could tell he focuses his directing more towards action and sci-fi films. His films are usually more flamboyant, visual style, using a combination of dynamic compositions, highly saturated color schemes. You also have different visual effects, such as speeding up and slowing down motion during action sequences in different movies, whether that's 300 or Watchmen. And you could even see it in Justice League in 2017 a bit, even though he had to step away from that project. And you could definitely see it in the Snyder Cut that he does put out on HBO Max. So these are just examples of slow motion shots of like a fist punching a cheek, or the heroes jumping and the camera slowing down into that big superhero money shot, etc. Movies do have a very high body count when it does come to Zack Snyder, sometimes accompanied with widespread metropolitan destruction, such as Watchmen, Man of Steel, or 300. I was able to research, and it has a body count of 585 total civilians that's dead. So you can tell that Zack really does push for that more realistic, like Rage Against the Machine type movies. So these films also generally deal with the tragic nature of heroism, as it forces the protagonist to make a decision in order to keep the plot moving forward. And this is something that not only I've seen in Zack Snyder movies, but in other director movies too. It's just something that helps the character learn who they are, that main character, as they go through and they progress as the protagonist. So that's something that I kept note of. While Snyder is the co-founder of Cruel and Unusual Films, it is a production company he established back in 2004. Then, Zack was in charge of creating a DCEU, or a Detective Comics Extended Universe, which started back in 2012 with the first movie releasing in 2013, which was Man of Steel, the Superman reboot starring Henry Cavill, but he is no longer Superman. And this was created in order to compete with Marvel's MCU, or Marvel Cinematic Universe. Although his first film, Man of Steel, was successful to create a starting point, the same couldn't be said for Batman, Superman, Dawn of Justice, followed by Justice League, whereas they both flopped in the box office. After the release of the Snyder Cut, though, last year when HBO Max first launched, DC then decided to cut ties with the director and move on, and eventually replaced him with James Gunn, who is known for his Scooby-Doo, his Guardians of the Galaxy, and now here he is in charge of the rebooted DCEU, which I find very interesting to see, but we'll see how that goes. So, for more on James Gunn, after Snyder's exit from DC, one of the more popular movies that came out was a soft reboot of the DC superhero group called Suicide Squad. After the flop of the 2016 movie with the same title, Suicide Squad, DC brought on James Gunn to help steer the ship at DC movies, and he chose, out of all the people, he chose the Suicide Squad, and made a film with the same name in 2021. James Gunn is known for directing movies outside of the superhero genre as well, such as Scooby-Doo 1 and 2, Movie 43, Sparky and Michaela, and finally Humanzy. Gunn differs from Snyder in the approach of directing, as James Gunn is more comedic and body horror. This can be seen in The Suicide Squad, along with the Guardians of the Galaxy, in which there is gore, blood, crude jokes, and subliminal messages. Gunn was hired by Marvel Studios to introduce the world to Guardians of the Galaxy in 2014, and because it was such a massive hit, it helped launch Gunn's career into the spotlight. And after making Guardians 1 and 2, he was fired from Marvel Studios and left for DC, where he made the Suicide Squad. And then Marvel was able to come up with a compromise with James Gunn to bring him back for that final Guardians of the Galaxy movie. And then it looks like he's leaving Marvel after Guardians of the Galaxy 3 in order to completely shift his focus on helping DC succeed in their movies. So, using this info I researched from IMDb, Marvel, and DC.com, I believe both directors are brilliant in their own ways, as Snyder uses the superhero genre in order to incorporate comic-accurate scenes and dialogue in ways such as Frank Miller used in his comic run as Batman. We could see that in the DC EU with an older, grumpier Batman played by Ben Affleck at the time, and he went on to take on Henry Cavill's Superman. From there, you also have Gunn, on the other hand. He doesn't go off comic-accurate storylines, but more of looks along with characters and being able to pull at the audience's feelings in ways that I haven't seen Snyder or really any other directors do, per se. He's able to go and create that like family dynamic, especially with those Guardians movies. I feel like it really does push that tone of family and togetherness, and it makes it harder to say goodbye to these characters the way James Gunn does. Unlike in the Suicide Squad, where you just have a group of supervillains teaming up to do a mission and they're losing heads and bodies and whatnot, but that main core of Harley Quinn, Bloodshot, Peacemaker, Ratcatcher, Polka Dot Man, they all kind of become a family and together, and now you're able to create that audience bond with them from James Gunn and his ability to write. So with that being said, to learn more about Snyder's ways of directing films, look into some different comic runs such as the DC's New 52, Tales of Teen Titans, JLA Rock of Ages, and finally The Dark Knight Returns. I think that's where Zack Snyder is able to get a lot of his inspiration from, especially if you actually do go back and you reread some of those comic books. You could definitely tell that they are pretty aligned with James Gunn's DC-centered movies. If you are interested in learning more of James Gunn's way of storytelling, look at comic runs such as Avengers 177, Marvel's Superheroes 18, Galactic Guardians 1, Annihilation 6. Those are all smaller runs and more individual books, but if you do have a chance to pick up those runs or books, they definitely have more of a James Gunn type comic book-y feel to them as you go through and you read them, which is pretty interesting to see, because even though they are different universes, or even if you take Spider-Man and Daredevil, Spider-Man's more lighthearted, more fun, more play, versus Daredevil a bit more serious. He does have jokes here and there, but especially if you look at that Netflix run, it's very darker than an average superhero film, I would imagine. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time on Boxes of Comics.